Good morning, everyone. My name is Matt Woodruff. I'm an assistant professor at Emory University. I'm also the co-host of an immunity-related podcast, Audio Immunity. Those of you that know me know that I have been recording some videos the last few days, talking about some of the changes to federal funding through the NIH and the impacts that it has on researchers like me, and the universities that we occupy. And it has been 3 days since I posted my last video, which of course means in the current environment that everything is different now. So I figured I would record from my native environment here. This is the office attached to my research lab in the other room. At some point, I'll give you a tour of that and talk about some of the things that have happened over the last couple days because, again, some seismic shifts, as has been happening every 24 hours or so, it seems, since late January. So the first thing is I wanted to reach out and tell you all that have reached out to me talking about how upset you are, the action that you're taking in calling representatives and things like that. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. It is meaningful to be able to inform folks of what's going on, and it's even more meaningful to know that you are taking that seriously. So I'm going to take this seriously. I'm going to try to continue to provide updates as things develop, and maybe even beyond the scope of this sort of indirect fight right now that's going on with the NIH. So with that in mind, thank you. And here's what's happened over the last couple of days. The big thing that's being reported in the news is that there was a federal injunction on the plan to cut indirect costs or cap indirect costs at 15% that was announced late last week. For those of you that are not familiar with indirect costs, I do have a couple videos. I would go back to the first one, maybe on Saturday, talking about what indirect costs are and how they relate to research science. But basically, a federal judge offered or ordered an injunction into that policy, and so it is currently frozen. Right. So the universities have been panicking a little bit, trying to figure out what their budgets are going to look like this week. Currently, that's on hold while everybody takes a deep breath and takes a hard look at what these policies we're going to do. I have dug a little bit. I think it's being widely reported that the injunction is there. I spent some time digging into the actual substance of what that injunction surrounds, right? So basically, here's what happened. 22 states filed a lawsuit against the National Institute of Health, basically saying that they were not allowed to unilaterally change the indirect rates as they did over the last weekend, right? And so there are a couple of federal statutes that basically came into play here. The first is there is a statute within the federal budget office that talks about how these rates are set university to university. And again, go back to that first video if you need an explanation as to, how this process all plays out. But essentially there is, as you can imagine, federal guidelines on how you decide what the percentage is that a university is going to receive off federal grants. There is also guidance in how to change that. So let's say you're a school and you're negotiating with the federal government and you make a mistake. You add a building that's not supposed to be there when calculating that rate, right? That's an error. It needs to be corrected for. And so you can't just say, well, we came at 48% if you were using bad data to get to that number. Right. So there is also a statute that covers how the NIH and Health and Human Services can change that number, right? How they can essentially alter the percentage that has already been negotiated with the end university. So that's the constraint. That's how you have to go about changing that agreed upon number. And then in 2017, the last time the Trump administration was in office, it seems that there was an idea to cap the indirect rate somewhere between 10 and 15%. And back then, of course, people knew, people like me that are directly impacted or immediately impacted at least, people knew that that this would be a bad thing, right? And so as a part of a huge appropriations bill, we're talking 850, 900 pages, there is a paragraph from a bill that was passed by Congress in 2018 that has said, essentially, Health and Human Services and the NIH cannot use federal funds in order to alter the terms of engagement around deciding these indirect costs. So basically, what that did was it created a legislative mandate that if the NIH was to try to change indirect costs, it had to do it within the confines of that second statute that we talked about, right? They had to follow the rules for how to alter those indirect cost rates. That was the basis of the lawsuit. It is also why the judge, it seems, ordered that injunction, right? Obviously, this was done unilaterally. People were not misrepresenting the costs associated with doing research at the universities. So it seems that at least temporarily, there is a federal judge, I believe, out of Massachusetts, that has decided that the government ran afoul of what Congress has essentially said is the way that we negotiate around these rates. So that's the good news. We received an email from Emory University's president talking about the potential impact of this policy should it be implemented. I won't get into that again. I think it's very much similar to what we talked about the other day. You know, the reach of this kind of hole that you put these universities into is much larger than just the research communities, right? Every aspect of these universities, which serve as economic hubs in many of the states that they occupy, would be impacted, right? So schools of theology attached to universities that also have research schools would be impacted by this, right? Schools of journalism, schools of engineering, all of these schools have large research components. And by pulling that much money out from underneath that university, you're impacting all of those things, not just the research apparatus. And I mention all that because another downstream impact of that federal injunction, or at least the conversation that you and I have been having and has been had now at the national level, is that there are several Republican senators that realize that they have major universities in their states, that those major universities are economic drivers within their states, and that these attempts to pull costs back out of those universities would have massive impacts, not just on a local research community, but at a statewide level. And so there were several Republican senators that came out and basically said, you know, this is not nearly a fine enough tooth to comb to start to make these major alterations. Like I said, there's Senator out of Alabama, Susan Collins out of Maine, which is good. I think it's important. It's a wonky topic. It's why, you know, I decided to make that first video. It's not clear exactly what an indirect cost is at face until you realize just how critical it is to the underlying infrastructure of these universities and larger economies. So all of that's to the good. But I do want to put on your radar something else, which is that RFK Jr. is looking like he's going to be confirmed as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. And again, Health and Human Services sits over the National Institute of Health. It sits over the CDC. It sits over the National Science Foundation. One thing that has happened is that Susan Collins approached RFK Jr. and said, you know, this is really crazy. And he said, yeah, no, this is definitely the kind of thing that we would like to reevaluate should you confirm me, right? And so essentially, the way that it looks from the outside is that this is a potential policy that was used as leverage to make sure that people were moving in the right direction. And you come across as reasonable by saying, well, you know, if it's going to just tank the whole economy, maybe we'll back off, right? Oh, that's great, right? So I think that there is more to come on this. Whether or not this particular policy is enacted, there are very real indicators that this was targeted at the research community. It was targeted at major universities. I think that's pretty obvious from anyone that's watching from the outside. And at the same time, we know that right now our colleagues across the street at the CDC are having to evaluate which of their personnel they believe to be essential and critical, right? So the top 50% or so is what I'm hearing from colleagues around Emory. We have a lot of collaborators, obviously, over there. So they are picking and choosing who is most valuable in those departments at a time when influenza is running through our bird and cow populations in a way that is quite concerning. And I'm not trying to be a fear monger here. Uh, I'm not trying to suggest that there is a deeply nefarious purpose for all of this. What I am trying to suggest is the administration has made it clear that they're going to be less than supportive of the research communities and the healthcare apparatus that was an important part of the response to COVID-19. So while I am excited that there was a federal injunction, and I don't think that today we're going to have to evaluate who gets fired from our research departments, I don't think that this is the last of this general story. So like I said, I appreciate your willingness to engage on all of this. And so I will try to repay that in kind by continuing to talk about the things that come out of the administration. I'll keep you updated here locally at Emory in my lab. And yeah, if you find this at all useful, please do subscribe to the channel. I'll try to post it here. And also, we have, science conversations that are a lot more light and fun. And so if you're interested in hearing about the immune system and how it works, please take a look at Autoimmunity. You can find us at autoimmunity.org. And thank you all for listening. Appreciate it. Have a good day.